So there's now a couple of steps that happen internally before we even respond to the client about whether
Yep.
we're going to engage in the opportunity or not. What one we call the QE, the quick evaluation, and that's a quick check of what's the lead time, the complexity, what's our production capacity, what's our suppliers' capacity, what's the calendar and busyness look like, all those things. If we pass that quick look, there's a deeper dive we take, what we call our go no go analysis, right? And that's when somebody from creative has to be involved on our team, and engineering and project management and production and field ops, and usually a financial person sitting in on the viability. And so we literally can spend hours and hours on the pregame of determining whether it's a qualified opportunity or not. So if I'm going to spend collectively 10, 15 hours really determine it. We try to do that, by the way, within 24 hours of the request. So we want to say, yes, we think there's something here. But do you have something similar, Greg, that you guys do?
We do. The perspective is a little bit different in that if we're pursuing an RFP or pitching potential new business, there's a huge investment that goes into developing that response or that pitch pre-sale. So we really have to be confident that this is something that is a good fit for our organization. Certainly all of those logistical criteria that you mentioned are critically important, but it's also, I think in terms of things like who are our stakeholders, how close to the decision maker are we? Is the budget allocated or is it speculated? And these are things that stakeholders may or may not divulge, procurement may or may not divulge. But if you don't know those, then you could spend a tremendous amount of time, energy, money pursuing something that was never really going to happen. Or you may just be justifying a decision that may have already been made. And I hate that. I'm just absolutely allergic to that process. So I'm very skeptical when we come into that qualifying process. I remember, Chris, back in the day, we used to talk about this as well. When you're asking some of those qualifying questions, be it internally or externally, or in your case, it might be to somebody in your sales organization who you need to, you want them to believe that they can win the opportunity. But when you're asking questions of a potential, a prospect, even an existing client, and they don't answer your question, either they ignore your question or they answer a different question. When I'm talking about budget allocation or decision-making authority, or what's the process for selecting a vendor, if they're not giving you a straight answer, then that's still an answer. And you've got to factor that into, whether or not you can, whether you should be pursuing that business.
That's a great point. And you recognize the phrases. I'm sure our listeners will. When you say, well, how much budget have you allocated for the design and the build? Well, we don't really have a budget, but if we like it, we'll go with it, right? And you go, okay, well, that's not a good. There's a friend of ours, a couple friends of ours. I was talking with Mark Taylor at Apogee recently, and he was reminding me of a Jeff Meisner from Sector 5. Shout out to Mark and Jeff. They used to have a point system when they qualified their opportunities. So, for example, if the client has a budget, it's plus 5 points. If the client has detailed show information, it's plus 5 points. If the client doesn't have a budget, right, then you subtract this. If a client doesn't have a design preferences or an objective about what they're trying to accomplish, then you take a few points off. So it was like something like it had to be at least 15 or 20 points to pursue. Otherwise, you let it go because you realized, you have a high probability. And I thought that was kind of an
Yeah, they're
interesting
trying
way
to introduce
to do that.
objectivity to something that's quite
Yes,
subjective, and
right.
that's I have to check myself sometimes too, because you're like, oh, I feel really great about this, and well, why is that? Well, because they like me, or I had a great rapport with the person. Well, that's
Yeah,
neat, but it may not have an impact on the actual decision. And unfortunately, coming in second just doesn't matter. It's the old Ricky Bobby,
yeah,
you're just the first loser. It might soften the blow, but it has the no impact on your business whatsoever to come in second place.
yeah. Smaller trophy for you if you're second, but it doesn't come with a deal.